Yeah. Go.
Arba'a Rosh Hashanim Heim. This mimer that was delivered by the Rebbe on Monday, Beshvat, in the year 1975, is based on the words of the Mishnah, which is found at the beginning of Masechet Rosh Hashanah. In the beginning, the opening words are, there are 4 Rosh Hashanah, 4 heads of the year. Echad ben Nisan, the first day of Nisan, is Rosh Hashanah leMelachim, is the new year, or head of the year for monarchy. L'Regolim, for the festivals. U'Mesayim, and the Mishnah concludes with the words, Be'echad Beshvat, Rosh Hashanah le'ilon. On the first day of the month of Shvat, we commemorate, we celebrate, we observe Rosh Hashanah, the new year for trees. Kedivrei Beis Shammai, that's from the perspective of the teachings of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel Eimrim, Beis Hillel, however, maintained that Bechamisha Asabay, that this day is observed on the 15th of that month. And that, in fact, is the halacha. Vehine. The Rebbe begins his analysis of the Mishnah by noting Shekol Dalid HaRosh Hashanim Nishnu b'Mishnah Achas, that all 4 of the Rosh Hashanah, all 4 of the New Year for trees, starting with the idea of Rosh Hashanah with leMelachim, which is on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, concluding with the last one, which is the New Year for trees, are all mentioned in the same Mishnah. So there must be some kind of connection between them, besides the fact that they're called Rosh Hashanah. In fact, it's precisely because of the fact that they have the same name, that their name is all Rosh. Rosh means a head, not the beginning, not the inauguration, not the launch, but the head. So since they're called head of the year, it must be that there's some corollary between them. Now we know that it's called Rosh Hashanah, it's not called Tchilas Hashanah. Alter Rebbe explains this in Maimorim L'Likutei Torah. It's also explained by the Mittler Rebbe in the Sefer called Ateres Rosh, that the reason that these days that herald a new beginning, to begin a new annual cycle, are called Rosh, the head, not Tchila, not the beginning, Lafi shehu bedugmas hareish shebegufa adam. It's in the image of the head, the place that the head occupies within the gestalt of a human body. So there's a head, there's a torso, there are limbs, and we know that chayes kol heivarim kol bay. Everything that happens in the whole body has a lot to do with the head. V'gam ka'asher hachayes bo l'chol ever b'fnei atzmei. In as much or even when the lifeblood or the animating force is dispatched throughout the whole body, and each limb has a unique ability and wherewithal, and everything functions in a different way. If the heart starts digesting or the intestines start pumping, we'll be in big trouble. Now, this is true in a physical sense, in a literal sense. The cellular structure is different, the function is different. You can see with your eyes, you can hear with your ears, and not otherwise. But in addition to this, there's a notion that there's a special spiritual force that the soul is comprised of. The soul has a koyach hariyah, a koyach hashmiyah, an ability to see, an ability to hear. It needs to have the right mechanism. It needs to have the right convention to be able to operate through. It needs the proper instruments. But the reality is that the soul also has these individual talents, abilities, wherewithals, or capabilities. So inasmuch as the fact that the body is unique, each part of the body is separate and different, and the neshama is comprised of many different abilities, even when we speak about the various parts of neshama as they are animating and activating different parts of the body, harei hareish manhigam, the center of everything remains the head. That's the nervous center. That's where all information is processed, and that's where all the instructions to the whole body, the coordination of the whole body, are all vested in the mind, in the brain. Chas v'shalom, something happens to the brain, we're in very big trouble. The brain is healthy, everything goes well. So just like this is true within the soul, psyche, and even physical schematic of a human being, so is also with regard to time. That there's times, frames within time, hanikroyim b'shem Rosh, they're called the head of the year. Like Rosh Chodesh, for example. That's every 12 or 13 months, depending on if you have a leap year. And then we have the idea of Rosh Hashanah, and we see here there's 4 Rosh Hashanah. She'inyanehu, the concept of Rosh Hashanah, she'metchila nimtsoyim kol hayomim klulim b'yem zeh. All of the days that are influenced by this particular day are now, if you will, included on that day. They're kind of all rolled up all in a very microcosmic way found in that first day. That first day that launches, that first day that is going to initiate the entire annual process. And it's like a Rosh, like the brain matter, which is very, very sensitive. And tiny cellular structure of the brain contains within it the entirety of the needs of the body. And it's all contained in that very, very small way, in a micro sense. So it is also with time, that each and every Rosh Hashanah has all of the days, or Rosh Chodesh for that matter, all the days that are under its influence are found in microcosmic form. And afterwards, when the details are unfolded, when the accordion is opened, they continue to be led by or guided with their head. Now, what we have explained now about the idea of the annual beginnings, or the rebooting on an annual basis, the cycle that goes every single year back to Rosh Hashanah, that's not unique to any particular kind of Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't matter what kind of Rosh Hashanah, or Rosh Hashanah for what. But if we talk about Rosh Hashanah L'Mlachim, the idea of monarchy then is in a sense infused with its energy and its fervor and passion and animation from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. If we talk about Regalim, if we talk about the festivals, talk about sacred nature of time, of us being able to try to live a life that's filled with meaning and purpose, so Rosh Hashanah, that's what our Rosh Hashanah is, Rosh Hashanah L'Regalim. For the various spiritual interaction, which ultimately leads to even the physical and literal iteration. That all happens on Rosh Hashanah. And then when we say Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, whatever it is that we're going to be celebrating the Shabbos, when it's Rosh Hashanah, when it's the New Year for trees, so we're going to be finding all of the days of the year that'll follow are all kind of included in this first Rosh Hashanah. And that's the common denominator between all the different kinds of Rosh Hashanah. Now, the Rebbe says, in addition to the fact that all of these Rosh Hashanah share corollary, there must be a special connection between Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the beginning of the month of Nisan, which is Rosh Hashanah L'Mlachim, and the Rosh Hashanah for trees, which is tomorrow on the 15th day of Shvat. Why? Because there is a mathematical equation, which is also discussed in the writings of Kabbalah. In the mathematical equation, it's called the circle. And the circle is made up of a line which is bent round and round until the beginning meets the end. This is based on a Kabbalistic principle that there's something called Kav, or Yosher, there's something called line, or linear reality. Linear reality begins here, and then ends somewhere else, has a beginning point and an end point. And that's always finite. Finitude is defined by a beginning and an end. And what is the example of infinitude, which we don't really know what that means? But the example in mathematics is a number 8 figure. I'm not sure why that has to be twisted. Why you have to? Can't you simply make it a circle? And that's how Torah makes it. A circle represents infinitude. And the reason is because you can keep going around and around and around and around. It doesn't end. It doesn't end. But it had an end. It had a beginning. It started off with linear reality, but the beginning was wedged or attached to the end. So once you take a line, which has a beginning here, an end there, and you take it and you put it together, you make it go round and round. So now, in theory, it's continuous. Whether you want to see it as a spiral or just going in the same place again and again. So the beginning is connected to the end. This is called, in the parlance of Torah, especially the mystical elements of Torah, as is found in Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of formation. It's the earliest mention of this that we have. It's called Na'otz Seifim B'tchilasan B'seifim. The end is attached or wedged into the beginning, and the beginning is wedged into the end. Okay, so then the Rebbe says, in this Maimer, after having introduced the general explanation of Rosh, the idea of Rosh Hashanah, insofar as a date on the calendar is concerned, and he said that the explanation of Rosh Hashanah, which is found in Chassidus with regard to the Rosh Hashanah that we usually talk about, the Rosh Hashanah which comes on the first day of Tishrei. But that idea applies to every Rosh Hashanah. So after we understand this idea of Rosh Hashanah, as it applies to all Rosh Hashanah, in this Maimer, the Rebbe seeks to understand the unique connection between Rosh Chodesh Nisan, or Rosh Hashanah L'Mlachim, the beginning, the hard reset for the annual cycle of monarchy, and the idea of Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos, the Rosh Hashanah for trees. So what's the special connection? V'yesh levarze. So the Rebbe, in this particular Maimer, the Rebbe begins to explain that an explanation for this could be appreciated based on this teaching of the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek. In the Tzemach Tzedek in Parshas Mishpatim, on the pasuk Shalosh Regolim Tochig Li Bashana, you should celebrate for me on 3 occasions during the year. Shemei Visham Divrei HaBechaya, he brings the words of Rabbeinu Bechaya, Vehapanim Yafis. 2 sages, great Torah sages, living in very different parts of the world and also in very different times. But both of them say something similar. Namely, the Gam Haragolim Heim Moyadim Al HaTvua. It's not only Rosh Hashanah Li'Lanois that's connected to agriculture or crops or a harvest, but in fact the festivals are also connected to agriculture. As we know, that Zman HaAviv, we have the time of the spring, we have the time of when things begin to bloom again. We have what's called Ktsir Seirim, and then we have, because we cut the barley. We have Chag HaKotzer, or Ktsir Chitim. We have the festival of the harvest, and this is when we begin to harvest the wheat. And then Chag HaSukkos is Mana Asif. And on Sukkot we celebrate the concept of bringing all of the produce home. So we have Pesach is Aviv. Pesach is when we bring a korban omer, which is brought from the barley corns, and that then 7 weeks later we have Chag HaKotzer, which is Shavuos. That's when the wheat is harvested, and everything is left out to dry over the summer, which is the meaning of the word Kayitz. And then in the fall we have Chag HaSukkos, which is the time when everything is gathered together. Why is there a connection? Why does the idea of Hashem's festivals, which is a spiritual idea, the concept of spirituality, the concept of connectivity to God on a personal level, that each and every one of us has to experience through sanctification of time, why is that connected to the concept of the earthly agricultural cycle? Seemingly this is a heavenly thing. This is spiritual, the movement of the heavenly bodies, and in general it's connected to the soul and spirit. Why do we have to connect it to harvest or the sustenance of a bodily reality? So the Rebbe says that this is Tuvan. This will be understood the Masher Kosov, what's written, Kadesh Yisrael LaHashem Reishes Tvuasa, that Israel is sanctified unto God like the firstling harvest or the firstling produce. She Yisrael Nikru Tvuas Hashem, that the prophet of in his lamentations of the Jewish people, Jeremiah refers to us as Hashem's produce or Hashem's grain or cereal. V'ksiv, and it's written in the book of Hosea, V'zarat eli ba'aretz, I have planted for me in the ground. V'omru razal, klum adam zereya kur. Does not a person plant a measure, however much a kur is, but you plant a measure of a kur, what? To be able to regain a kur? You plant a kur to be able to make a profit, so that many kurim will grow. That means the kemei bezrias tatvua harei al yedei zrias chita achas or sa'ir achas, just like when it comes to the physical material, literal act of planting, that you take one bulb, one seed, one wheat, one bulb of barley. And then what happens is that one results in many because of one, once it germinates and then sprouts. You have a stalk which has many bulbs. Al derech zeh ba'am Yisrael. So too is also with the nation of Israel. B'chlalusei, generally speaking, u'b'chol echad v'echad miYisrael b'frat, and even particularly, individually speaking. Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu zra'am ba'aretz. God planted us, if you will, in the ground. The idea of coming for an neshama to assume a bodily or physical terrestrial form is metaphorized as coming from Igra, a great mountain peak from great heights, into a bira mikta, into a very deep gorge. And that's b'shvil hatzmicha. So that idea of the neshama going from a very high place to a very low place, this is metaphorized as planting. Just like planting goes into the ground, it's invested in a lowly reality. But once it dissolves in the ground, amazing growth ensues. So too is also with Am Yisrael, that this business of our neshamas going from a very lofty place, being invested into a very mundane place, this is also the concept of like planting. And there should be growth, and the growth should be a ribui gadol, an extraordinary flowering, an amazing growth, which is when you compare it to what was there before. Okay, so let's now recap. The first paragraph, the Rebbe described the concept of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh, not Chila. Head, not beginning. That's the first. That was foundation A. Foundation B in understanding this, we talk about the festivals, and we say the festivals are also agricultural. And we ask the question, why? What's the unique nature? Why agriculture? Why does that define us as a Jewish people in our spiritual service to Hashem? And the answer is that the concept of the agriculture is the perfect metaphor for the neshama that comes down into a physical body. That's the metaphor. That's the idea, the concept of the idea of growth and planting. Now, in the third paragraph, the Rebbe says, "V'hinei af sheyesh hefresh bein zriyas tvua lenetiyas ilones." Now, there is a big difference between produce, grain, cereal, and between trees or fruit. Shebezriyas hatvua, when you plant grain, haregam hazera hanizra huchita isaira. What is planted is what grows. You have wheat. The bulb of wheat is the same bulb that was planted. And in fact, the bulb that's planted has whatever taste and edible properties that later grow. That's what the original bulb has. The original barley that was planted is the same barley that grows. It tastes the same. It can be eaten the same fashion. It's just that this barley corn, instead of eating it, instead of using it, this wheat, instead of turning it into bread, you decided to throw it to the ground and turn it back into mud. But it didn't remain soil. Instead, it produced a new stalk for you. V'hainu, that is to say, shat smicha be'ilon eisapedes, that when you plant, pardon me, very different when you plant trees. The seed that's planted, that produces beautiful apples or pomegranates, that produces luscious figs or dates, the bulb that's planted does not look good or taste good or even have the same form as the actual end fruit. And when you plant a tree, which in the end will produce fruit, it's there's a totally different quality. I know, of course, you're going to tell me that scientifically speaking, there's the same substructure and there's the same genetics that the fruit has is found already inside the seed. True. But when you look at a seed, the quality of the seed and the quality of fruit is vastly different. You can't even compare one to another. There's a similar process, the process of planting, of germination, and of subsequent growth, of flowering. There is a similarity between grain that grows, which is planted annually, or the tree that flowers perennially. That's true. The truth is, it's not that one bulb gets divided into many bulbs. Nobody believes that, and that's ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. What happens? It's only after the bulb dissolves in the ground entirely, in the verbiage of Torah, that it animates and activates the power to grow which is in the ground. But you have to introduce the bulb and the earth, the soil and bulb have to mesh as one. And only after the bulb dissolves in the soil, only then can the soil's incredible ability suddenly be released. And depending on what you planted, that's what's going to grow. It awakens, that bulb awakens the power of wheat or barley or whatever other grain it is in the ground. So that it should be able to produce an abundance of wheat or barley. Now, the truth is that the wheat or barley itself no longer exists. It dissolves entirely. And only after it loses its entity entirely, and only after it's dissolved, only then is it possible for it in turn to seed or to engender a remarkable flowering of growth. That's true. The bulb itself doesn't exist. The bulb itself isn't technically replicated. Even though, if you look at it on a very, very superficial level, you'll see, here's a bulb. You'll see a bulb, yeah, it's like a wheat. Put it in the ground. What do I end up with? Many bulbs, many seeds. So it looks like the exact same seed replicated or multiplied itself many times. That's what it looks like. But in truth, if you want to talk about what's really going on here, we're talking here about a new birth, a new development. Those bulbs, those seeds did not exist before. Those seeds of grain only were created later on. It's not as if the first bulb actually still exists, only now in multiple form. So in a way, it's like a tree. But on the surface, it's not like a tree. Because when you talk about grain, the same bulb is planted, the same bulb is produced. We talk about the tree, the seed that goes in the ground does not produce simply seeds, but rather a tree which will eventually produce fruits. It's very different. Now going back to the object of the metaphor, so it is also with each and every single yid. That this descent, that the neshama goes to a very lofty place, into a very low place, which we said is metaphorized, the idea of planting. What's the purpose of it? Why take a neshama that it was existing in its highest levels of spirituality, in the closest spiritual communion with God? You take this neshama and you put it into a physical terrestrial reality where the neshama doesn't even recognize itself. He doesn't recognize surroundings. What would you do this for? And the answer is, let's say, chaliyah. This is all for the purpose of an appropriate ascent. You're trying to achieve something greater. That's why you melt down what you had to begin with. This is through the fact that we become like soil, a soil of desire, a ground of desire. With regard to all of the Jewish people, the Navi Malachi says, he declares, you will be a land of desire for me, Hashem says. And this means, which is brought by the Siddireinu, by the Friedrich many times. That every single yid has to be seen as a land of desire. And that means, just like the land has sunken into it, all kinds of treasures and incredible natural resources. And all kinds of precious metals and precious stones. All of this is in the ground. So too, this is with regard to each and every one. It's not the same. You want to take out the power of growing from the ground. It's not the same as taking diamonds out of the ground, or nickel, or silver, or gold. Everything is different. There's a way to mine gas, and a way to mine oil, and a way to mine precious metals, and a way to get water. But all of it is about lahoitzi me'ahelim elagili. It's all about discovering the potential that exists and revealing it. And doing so, it's a kol echad v'echad. And just like it is in the material, literal sense, sometimes it's easy. It's right on the surface. It doesn't take much effort. Sometimes it requires enormous effort. So the gas in the tar sands is very easy. It's right there. The oil is just, you put a pipe in, you get the oil coming out. However, if you go out in places like Alberta, you have to frack through an enormous amount of stone, shale, to get through all the shale, get through all the stone on top. That's very, very hard, very expensive. That's why when the price of oil went down, that whole industry dried up in Western Canada. Why? Because it costs $50, $60 to get a gallon of gasoline. So when a gallon of gasoline is going for $120 a barrel, then you make a 100% profit. But when it's going for $50 a barrel, you have a $10 loss. It's not worth it anymore. But it's the same idea. It's revealing the potential that's there. It's only how much effort goes in. So going back to our original metaphor, which is not about oil or gas or nickel or precious stones, but rather about planting in the ground. So it's got to get planted in the ground. And then it's like they recover in dafke. It has to dissolve. If it cannot dissolve, it cannot grow. And that's why it can't grow in sand. It can only grow in fertile soil. Because fertile soil is what allows for the proper decomposition of the bulb. If the bulb doesn't decompose, it will have no growth engendered. It's all about the decomposition. And that's the meaning of Reishis HaAveda V'ikra V'Shosha. So if we are metaphorized as planted, then what's necessary for us is decomposition. Decomposition or dissolving. And that, my dear friends, is the meaning of the Alter Rebbe says in the 41st chapter of Tanya, that this is Reishis HaAveda. All growth begins with the decomposition. All growth begins with the dissolving in the ground. What does that mean in the level of Avodas Hashem? It means bittul. It's all got to begin with bittul. If I know everything and I have everything and I'm comfortable with everything, I'm never going to do anything. I'm never going to grow. I'm perfectly comfortable. So I have to have a feeling of lack and desire, and I have to have a feeling of insufficiency, and I have to have a feeling of inadequacy. And only when I have those things, and only when in a state of bittul, and only when I'm not prepared to just follow the same continuum, that's when growth can ensue. That's the idea of bittul. That's the idea, first and foremost, of a yid nullifying himself for Hashem. That's Kabbalah Sel, the first mitzvah we do. We read the Shema. That's how every day begins. That's Reishis HaAveda. That's the beginning of everything. It's Ikra. It's its source. and its sharsha, it's its root. It's its root source, and it's where it continues to get its strength from. That's where the produce comes from. When a yid is in a state of bittul, then incredible things can happen. When it's all about you, very little can happen. When you transcend yourself and you live with a higher cause and for a higher purpose, you're able to put yourself aside, then amazing growth can ensue. Just like it is with regard to the concept of grain. That David HaMelech states in Psalm 126, those who sow with tears, they will be able to harvest in joy and happiness. The result is in the end that you end up carrying these big sheaves of grain, that you have this amazing growth to show for yourself. This is what happens in the end. First is the idea of the weeping, the crying. The weeping and crying comes from a sense of inadequacy. The weeping and crying comes from a sense of unfulfillment, of yearning, of desire, of dissatisfaction. So when this hazayim bedima, so what happens is that yelech uvachay nesemesh hazara, that engenders the concept of growth. Then a process begins to unfold as a result. And that process begins to unfold as a result. Yaveh berina, in the end, you'll come with great joy, with great happiness, carrying this harvest that you brought home. But in the beginning, it felt so inadequate. It felt so hard, so painful, so difficult. You did it in tears. This is, my dear friends, how it works with regard to serving Hashem in our Aveda. That when things get planted in the ground, it's got to dissolve, meaning the idea of bittul, the idea of self-abnegation, the idea of self-diminishment. But when that happens, nasas mizeh simcha. In the end, joy ensues. Bizman atzmicha, in the time of harvest. The hagilui, when things are revealed. Shezeu masha hagimul regolim him layadim l'simcha. Now we're going back to what the Bechai and the Panim Yafas were talking about when they said that the idea of the festivals is connected to the concept of the agricultural cycle, because when there is azayim b'dima, when there is the efforts that are made with the state of bittul, then we come to the concept of the joyous harvest, which is the Moedim L'Simcha, the joyous festival. The Shalosh Regalim emphasize both of these things, both of these poles, both these details. Why? Number one, Regalim, the term Regalim, which is the biblical, the Hebraic term for festival, is Miloshan Regel. It comes to the terminology of Shalosh Regalim, 3 feet. Like it says in the Mishnah in Chagiga, Ezehu Katan Sheni Yochel Lecha is Biyad Shalav Laus Yerushalayim. Who is the child it's exempted, doesn't have to go to Yerushalayim? That he can't be held, so to speak. He can't walk on his own feet because it says Shalosh Regalim. So if the child has to be held, that's not a child who's obligated in Shalosh Regalim. It has to be a child who can walk on his own feet. Only after he can do it himself. As Rashi explains, Haroi Lalas Beraglav Chayev, the one who can walk on his own. That's who's obligated. The baby who cannot walk, he's not obligated. And the Mishnah Gemara goes on to say, Chige Beraglav, a person who's lame, unable to walk, Patim in Adiyah. He's exempt from going to Yerushalayim. Why? Because it says Shalosh Regalim. What is the idea of regel? What's the idea of a foot? Regel. Regel is the concept of bittul. Aveda of bittul kabal sale. So on one hand, the idea of the festivals is bittul. The foot is just, go ahead, does what has to be done. But on the other hand, we call them Moedim L'Simcha. We call them appointed times of joy. Which Simcha Ulamaila, Simcha, joy, is a force that is not only greater than the foot, Elegam Eresh, even higher than the head. Shalachain, that's the reason that we have this idea of Simcha Peretz Geder, that joy melts down all and any kind of limitations. It's L'Maila V'Havana V'Asaga. When a person is in a state of joy, he transcends even rhyme or reason. With these two ideas of the festivals, on one hand calling them Shalosh Regalim, alluding to the idea of a regel. Regel is the idea of bittul. Like we know that the heel of a person is called Malach HaMavash Shabbat, the least amount of life. And the feet, you don't break the glass under the chuppah with your nose, you break it with your heel, you break it with your feet. The feet is the idea of Kabbalah Seil, of bittul, doing what has to be done. The feet don't have intelligence, they don't have to explain, you don't have to explain it to the feet just have to go and do what's necessary. They're on the ground. So on one hand, the festival is called a regel. On the other hand, the festival is called Moedim L'Simcha. On one hand, we talk about the bittul, Bechina Zriya, that's the idea of planting. On the other hand, we talk about harvest and growth, the Teisefes ha'ilu shenasa batzmicha. And so this is the idea of the new growth that ensues afterwards. In the Hemshech of the Maimer, the Rebbe goes back to talk about from the idea of Malachim. And he said that in order for a king to be a king, the king has to be in a state of bittul, has to be in a state of total self-abnegation, total commitment to his charges, to his citizens, to his constituency. Only then is a king a proper king. So he says, just like Malchus is the idea of bittul, so too the concept of, from the discussion of tvua, of grain, the Rebbe exports this into the concept of trees, which is even more manifold. It's a greater bittul, because the growth doesn't even look like the original seed that's planted. And therefore, that's the connection between the Rosh Hashanah of Malachim and Rosh Hashanah of trees, of Ilanais, that both of them begin with the concept of extraordinary bittul, and on the other hand, both of them have the idea of extraordinary growth. But the truth is that the things you plant annually, like the grain, you have to replant it every year. And how much does it grow? So one bulb multiplies 10 times, 20 times. But a tree, one tiny seed, can end up producing hundreds of thousands, millions of fruits over the course of decades or centuries of growth. And therefore, this Maimer is then really all about the idea of this Rosh Hashanah of Malachim, of both of responsibility and taking a leadership role, is also connected to the concept of the trees, bittul on one hand, the self-nullification, self-abnegation on one hand. Conversely, the idea of the extraordinary growth, the idea of Hazayda Medima, Berina Yiktzaidu, which is ultimately is also the idea of Galus and so on and so forth. And we have to stop at this point. So let us say L'chaim, Hashem should help us. That's from all the difficulties and the travails. We should be zeicher to the great growth, the tzmicha, the flowering of the coming of Mashiach, b'mheira u'b'yameinu. Amen.